A question that often comes back is multiverse. What comics do you read? Let's find out. Hello, heroes and villains. Welcome to Multiverse. So today we are going to take a look at Superman, the Man of Steel, Volume 2. We already took a look at Volume 1, so today we're looking at Volume 2, and we start with a nice money shot of Superman flying with Lois Lane. So you can see some of the credits of the people working on the book. The book is you'll see mostly artwork and writing by John Byrne, where there's quite a few other people who contributed to the book. I have the hardcover and the Kindle version of the book, and the hardcover is a really nice looking book. Although I'm not sure why, for the spine, for the volume 1, they had a nice blue spine. But starting with volume 2 all the way to volume 4, somehow they turned the spine to orange for some reason. So it kind of looks a bit weird. Basically, the first volume doesn't really match with the rest of the series. But that's a minor nitpick for the hardcover version. If you read the Kindle version, sadly reading Kindle comics on PC is a bit of a pain in the butt, especially for double page spread. Basically, double page spread ends up being really small on your screen. So the best option to read Kindle comics is to use a tablet. It doesn't have to be a Kindle tablet. Other tablets could do the trick. Basically, what you need is something where you can actually zoom into the screen. So, for example, if you have a PC with a touch screen, you'll be fine. So here we start with Superman issue number 5. In an issue where Lois Lane is trying almost to be the new Indiana Jones. Although at the time we did not have a female Indiana Jones just yet, Lara Croft Tomb Raider was not created just yet, so maybe Lois Lane could have been our female Indiana Jones, we'll never know. And here we have a bit of a flashback of when Superman met Wonder Woman during the Legends miniseries. Although it's not really flashback, it's more like of a dream sequence. Sadly, there's always been a bit of a fan fiction where Superman goes out with a Wonder Woman. Somehow people didn't buy that Superman would go after someone like Lois Lane. They always thought that Superman should be with someone like a Wonder Woman. And sadly, John Byrne decided to explore the question a bit. Ultimately, the whole point of the story was that Superman and Wonder Woman should not be going out together. Even though they're superpowered beings, they're two very, very different individuals with completely different backgrounds, and they should not be together. Although sadly, a lot of people got the wrong message from that comic. So later on, some comic book creators would have Superman and Wonder Woman have a relationship, and obviously they would point to this story as an example that Wonder Woman and Superman should be together. And sadly, they're missing the whole point of the story, but what can you do? It happens very often, sadly. And here, a nice shot of Superman flying away. Also, John Byrne did a somewhat clever thing. Basically, he had Superman fly away into space, and basically he used the rotation of the Earth to be able to reach his destination. So instead of flying straight to his destination, he flew up, let the Earth turn a bit, and then went back down to his destination. And then he had to fight some evil mysterious villain. Obviously it's mysterious because it's all wrapped up in bandages, and ironically enough there wasn't a lot of Superman in that issue. Somehow Clark Kent pretty much remains a Clark Kent, but he had to use his superpowers as Clark Kent, at least a little bit. I'm going to try not to spoil too much. Ideally, I would like you guys to read those comics, so I'll try to tell you just enough so that you have some background info, and to give you just a taste of those comics, so that you can see how awesome those comics are. So here we have the cover of issue 6. And then we got a classic trope that would come back from time to time. Oh my god, Lois Lane discovered that Clark Kent is Superman. I'm not going to show you how it resolves, I will let you do that yourself. But here we have, again, nice classic John Byrne pose. I love that pose. And next we get The Adventures of Superman by Jerry Ordway and Marv Wolfman. So basically we had one series by John Byrne himself and one series by Jerry Ordway and Marv Wolfman. Eventually Marv Wolfman would leave the book, and the writing duties of Adventures of Superman would be split between John Byrne and Jerry Ordway. By now I've seen a lot of comics written by Jerry Ordway, and I assume this was pretty much when he got his start as a writer. When Marv Wolfman left, he probably was splitting the writing duties with John Byrne, and that's probably what allowed him to be able to write his own comics afterwards. And next we have Action Comics with Hawkman and Hawkgirl. Not sure why Hawkgirl is not listed on the cover. I guess they were trying to keep it simple, although technically Hawkgirl is sort of the bad guy in the comic, but I will let you find that out. And then we have the Green Lantern Corps. At the time, the Green Lantern comic was no longer just about Hal Jordan, it was about the entire Green Lantern Corps, which sadly was pretty much the characters you see on the screen right now. At that point, most of the Corps was gone, the Guardians of the Universe were gone, and these were pretty much what was left of the Green Lantern Corps. And at that point, they had pretty much established their base of operation on Earth. Although in this story, they have to help those cute little aliens to find a new homeworld. And then we go back to the Superman comic with the evil Rampage. I have to admit, this was my only exposure to the character. I have no idea if this is an old Silver Age character that John Byrne reused, or if it's one of his creations. And then we go back to the Adventures of Superman with the evil Mammoth. Actually, it's not just Mammoth, it's the entire Fearful Five. These were villains from the Teen Titans comic, so I was familiar with those because I had read the Teen Titans before that. And here we have a nice recap of pretty much events that happened in the Superman comics at the time. Basically, way back when, they were going under the assumption that every comic was someone's first comic. So once in a while, they would put some sort of a flashback or some sort of recap of what had happened before. So here we pretty much have a recap of what happened in the various Superman comics at the time. You can even see like the part about the Green Lantern that we just saw not too long ago. And we have a pretty cool close-up of Superman with some great light and shadow, something that is straight out of a Wallace Wood drawing. I love it. Jerry Ordway was very much influenced by Wallace Wood, and whenever I look at Jerry Ordway's work, I see Wallace Wood. And here we have the Metal Man. This was my introduction to the characters, and it was a fun bunch of characters to explore. Also, they were doing something that we saw very rarely at the time. They were making references to Crisis on Infinite Earths. Technically, the only character that really remembered the Crisis on Infinite Earth was the Psycho Pirates, but once in a while they would sort of refer to the Crisis. People would sort of remember that there had been some sort of crisis before, but they did not really know what happened. At the time, the only character that really remembered the Crisis on Infinite Earths was the Psycho Pirate, but he was in a loony bin, so no one was really paying attention to him. And then later on, there would be Superboy Prime, Superman, Alexander Luthor that would break out from their pocket universe, and they remembered the Crisis on Infinite Earth. They remembered when worlds lived, worlds died, and nothing would ever be the same. And here we have a cute bit where somehow Chemo was able to absorb the powers of Superman and became Super Chemo. And we have also the Metal Man that can assemble into various things. So here they assemble together to form some sort of plane, but here they can assemble together to form some sort of robot. It was a fun bit. It's something we've seen in a lot of series with giant robots like the Constructicons or Voltron or that kind of stuff. Although in the case of the Metal Man, they could get together in order to form a whole bunch of stuff, not just a giant robot. And next, we would have Superman versus Superboy. And I just mentioned Superboy Prime, and this is not it. This is actually the classic Superboy from before Crisis on Infinite Earths. But multiverse, I hear you says, the multiverse is gone. How can Superboy still be around? Let's talk about it. For some reason, when they decided to reinvent Superman with Man of Steel, they decided that Superman would be the last son of Krypton, and they also decided that Superman had never been Superboy. They were taking a lot of inspiration from the Superman movie. In the Superman movie, Superman goes straight from being Clark Kent to being Superman, and he never was Superboy in that movie. So a lot of stuff was taken from the movies, although a lot of stuff also was done to pretty much do the opposite of what the movies did. Like the movies did kill Pa Kent, the comics didn't. In the movies, he did not play football. The comics decided to make him play football so that it could be a little bit different. But ultimately, the comics decided to do what the movies did. It decided not to have a Superboy. And then half a quarter of a second later, they had to bring back Superboy because I guess they came to realize that, holy crap, the Legion of Superheroes needs Superboy. There cannot be a Legion of Superheroes if there's not a Superboy. I don't know really what happened. I don't know if they did not think it through. When they decided to reinvent Superman without Superboy, maybe the creators did not think it through and did not realize all the impact it would have on the rest of the DC Universe. Very often, we see that very often. Very often, the creators will make a decision and they don't think it through. They don't think of all the implication it has. They don't think of the ripple effect it will have, not just on this one character, but on all the characters in the DC Universe. We saw a similar example not too long ago with Shazam. Basically, at some point, DC decided to reinvent Captain Marvel into Shazam for a whole bunch of reasons, but they did not really think it through because first, Shazam is a trigger word that transforms the character, and we see that in the trailer for the new Shazam movie, where he cannot even say Shazam. He has to say it to tell his family, say my name when I transform, because he cannot say Shazam. Or even worse, we saw it with the character of Mary Marvel. When they added Mary Marvel to DC Universe Online, they could not call her Mary Marvel because the character is no longer called Captain Marvel. So they had to call her just Mary from the Shazam League. So it basically, when Jeff Jones decided to rename Captain Marvel to Shazam, or when DC decided to rename Captain Marvel to Shazam, whatever happened, they did not really think it through, and they did not think how it would affect the other characters in the Marvel family. They did not think how it would affect Mary Marvel, or even Captain Marvel Jr. I have no idea what they're naming him now. Obviously, he's not called Captain Marvel Jr. anymore, but I have to admit, it's been a long, long time since I read any Shazam comics, so I have no idea what they're calling Captain Marvel Jr. these days. Now, maybe they did think it through and they had some other plans involving not having a Superboy anymore, but again, there could be also other forces like the marketing department. I can guarantee you that when they decided to get rid of Superboy, people in the marketing department were not happy at all because Superboy was one of the brands that they were trying to sell. And if the character no longer existed in the comics, how could you sell the Superboy brand to make toys, T-shirts, whatever? So it probably made their life a bit more difficult for the marketing department, and they probably were not too happy about that. So maybe the marketing department were the ones who made pressures so that Superboy would come back, and the only way they found to be able to bring back Superboy was to create this convoluted mess of creating a pocket universe created by the Time Trapper where Superboy would exist. So a story would be needed to explain all of that, and the story started in the pages of the Legion of Superhero, obviously. Although full disclosure, I never read that story until I purchased this volume. Basically, way back when, they had started to make what they were calling prestige format comics, and sadly, the only place where you could get those comics were in comic book stores. These were exclusives to comic book stores. But also, I started reading the series way after the fact. As you guys saw, I started reading Superman by John Byrne with the issue where he fights Booster Gold. So I went back to buy a whole bunch of back issues, but I never bought that back issue of the Legion of Superheroes. And here we have the story that continues within the pages of Superman. And here we have a clever bit where John Byrne reuses one of his Fantastic Four cover. Basically, John Byrne had done this issue of Fantastic Four where they fight Gladiator. And a bit of history, Gladiator was pretty much the Superman equivalent in the Marvel Universe. In the X-Men comics, at some point, Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum had the X-Men face off against a group called the Imperial Guard, and they were pretty much a pastiche of the Legion of Superheroes. Dave Cockrum was a big fan of the book, and even had worked on the Legion of Superheroes. Some of his designs, like Nightcrawler and Storm, were rejected. Basically, they were rejected designs from his days drawing the Legion of Superheroes. But I guess Dave Cockrum never lets a good design go to waste, and he reused some of those designs when he redesigns the all-new, all-different X-Men. And the rest is history. So here we have John Byrne recreating his Fantastic Four cover. So obviously Superman instead of a Gladiator, Block instead of the Thing, Sunboy instead of a Human Torch, Invisible Kid instead of the Invisible Woman, although I think she was still the Invisible Girl way back when, and Brainiac 5 instead of Reed Richards, of course. And of course, some misunderstanding happens, and now it is time to do battle. And also, we'll get a nice shot of the Legion of Superheroes by John Byrne. It's a nice shot. He credits Greg LaRocque. We'll see the Greg LaRocque version a bit later. And here we have a bit of a recap explaining the history of the Legion of Superheroes and a whole bunch of their various villains. So of course, then the story continues in Action Comics where we have Superman versus Superboy. And this is pre-crisis Superboy, so he was much more powerful than Superman. And when John Byrne decided to reinvent Superman with Man of Steel, one of the things he decided to do was to make him less powerful. So here, our poor friend Superman is no match against Superboy. Of course, they will find a way to prevail, but I will let you guys read that story. Although technically the story ends in the pages of the Legion of Superheroes once more, but I'm not going to say much, and we'll let you guys enjoy that story by yourself. But basically, they use the time sphere to confront the evil villain that's behind it all. And then we go back to the adventures of Superman. Although the cover is by Jerry Ordway, the artist inside will be a guy called Eric Larson. I have to admit, I had no idea who he was at the time. Although I recall seeing some of his work, I think, in Doom Patrol at the time, but I really wasn't familiar with Eric Larson until he started drawing The Amazing Spider Man. And then we have an issue with the evil Joker. Although it was more of a split issue, the first half is with the Joker, a short story with the Joker, where it's pretty much brain versus brawn. And technically, Superman has to use his brain. His muscles won't be able to get him out of this situation, so we have to think his way through. And then we have a short story with the evil Lex Luthor. I guess John Burns saw Indecent Proposal one time too many because that's basically what he did. Basically, Lex Luthor goes into a diner and he offers the waitress $1 million to do the unthinkable. It is something we would see from time to time where someone would take inspiration from a movie. For example, Batman the Long Halloween. Some of it is pretty much inspired by Presumed Innocent with Harrison Ford. So sadly, sometimes writers will take a lot of inspiration from other sources. Although I'm always a bit surprised that it got past the editors. You would think that the editor would be able to say, no, we're not doing that. But I guess sometimes when the creator is too big, there's nothing the editor really can do. And then we go back to the adventures of Superman. So in this case, it will be Jerry Ordway. It won't be a fill-in issue. Also, the title Adventures of Superman often had a tendency to tackle down-to-earth issues, street-level drama. I guess already way back when, Marv Wolfman was using his comics not just as entertainment, but as some sort of a platform to bring in some sort of message, especially social messaging. It's something we see a lot these days, and we see a lot of complaint about that. But it used to happen already way back when. It's just that a lot of creators were a little bit more subtle about it. Although in this case, I think Marv Wolfman wasn't very subtle in most of his stories. Very often, sadly, those stories with social messaging kind of end up sounding like PSA comics. I'm sure you've seen those PSA comics, like it's like an after school special comics or something, where they try to give an important message to kids, like kids don't do drugs, or kids violence is bad, or kids learn to use computers. Very often those PSA comics are very cringe because they're straight on the nose. They're pretty much preaching to the audience. And that's part of the issue with a lot of comics that decide to go the social messaging route, is that they no longer try to entertain to have an entertaining story. They just try to have a message in their story, and they seem to think that as long as they have the message, the rest of the story doesn't matter. But it's nothing new. Way back when, Marv Wolfman was already doing that. That's probably why one of the best PSA comic I ever read was a PSA comic with the Teen Titans. Already the Teen Titans already had some social messaging built into the comic. So I guess when they decided to make a Teen Titans PSA comic, actually they made two of them, I think. And even better, they made two of those comics with the actual creators. George Perez and Marv Wolfman would be the ones doing those comics. Which is probably why those comics were so good, because basically they did the same thing they were doing in the monthly Teen Titans comics. The only difference is that in this case, it was an official PSA comic. And here we have the infamous Action Comics with Big Barda. I'm not going to tell you much about the story, other than I don't know why John Byrne thought it would be a good idea to have Superman and Big Barda do the Wild Thing. It's all we'll say about that. So be warned. If you're offended by that kind of stuff, then don't read that comic. I don't know why John Byrne thought it was a good idea to have Superman and Big Barda do a sleazy videotape. I guess it was his way back when to try to be cool and edgy and maybe a bit shocking. And sadly at the time, John Byrne was the biggest creator ever you had in comics. So I guess the editor could not really reining him on that one. They should have, but somehow they were not able to. Or maybe they did not even try. Maybe they agreed with it. We'll never know. And then we come back to Superman. And I guess it's a fun issue where Superman kind of loses control of his powers. So it did give way to a few funky scenes during the comic. But it also gave way to some, let's say, lame villain. It kind of works within the context of the story, but Clash being a villain, not really. So we come back to the adventures of Superman. And then we have something that I'm always very surprised to see. We have a story with Mr. Mixus Pitalik. Basically, John Byrne got rid of a whole bunch of, let's say, silly aspects of Superman from the 70s or the 60s or even the 50s. You would think that Mr. Mixus Pitalik would be one of those silly things he would get rid of. And I fully embraced it. I'm not sure he pulled it off though. I will let you decide when you do read that comic. And then we go back to the adventures of Superman. And I think this is the introduction of a Gangbuster. If he was introduced in some other comic, I'm not aware of it. This is pretty much the first time I saw him as far as I can recall. And again, it goes back to Marvel Wolfman trying to do some more street level stories and trying to tackle street level crime. So here we have Jose Delgado, who decides to become gangbusters to try to fight some of the criminals that Superman doesn't deal with somehow. And it's a trope we see a lot these days, but it started again way back when. You would have, let's say, gangbusters dealing with street level criminals, and then blaming, let's say, Superman for not dealing with those crimes. I mean, Superman only saves the entire world pretty much every week. So he's not really doing anything important. He's not saving the little guy on the street corner. Like somehow, because Superman was not solving street level crime, what he was doing wasn't important, even though he literally saved the entire Earth many times. We even saw that trope in the Ant-Man movie. Basically, Ant-Man's daughter basically blames him for not being an activist or something like that, where Ant-Man literally saved half the universe. And it's a trope we've been seeing for a long time. Heck, technically, the Green Lantern Green Arrow comic was just that. Green Lantern was so busy saving the universe that he wasn't taking care of the little guys. And then at some point, he had to go on a road trip with Green Arrow to try to get back in touch with down to earth people, with street people. So it's an old trope that's always been a bit weird, which I guess betrays the belief of the people making the comics, is that if you're not an activist, even if you save the world every week, you're not doing anything important. Which is probably one of the reasons why we had Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. I guess they decided that the superheroes, it wasn't enough that superheroes were saving the universe, they also had to tackle real life issues within their stories. And here we have a nice cover by Jerry Ordway, and this would be the last issue of this volume. Also, we got a few nice covers that Jerry Ordway did for various trade paperbacks. And the book ends with a few pages from Who's Who, starting with Mr. Mixus Pitalik. Again, I was a bit surprised to see this character. So we have the Who's Who page for Rampage. I never saw that character before that or after that. We have the Who's Who page for Superboy, until Superboy no longer existed, of course. And here we have the Who's Who page for the Legion of Superheroes, which John Byrne used as inspiration when he did his great Legion of Superhero money shot. And last but not least, we have the evil Time Trapper. It's a bit convoluted with the Time Trapper. The first time I encountered the Time Trapper was in the pages of Legion of Superheroes, around the time of the wedding of Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad. And at the time it was revealed that the Time Trapper was a controller. But then later on it was revealed that he actually was an older version of Cosmic Boy. And then much later on he was revealed to be Superboy Prime. So it's a bit of a mess when it comes to the Time Trapper. Whenever new writers get a new idea of who the Time Trapper could be, they turn the Time Trapper into that character. And we end the book with a money shot of Superman in space. And the back cover obviously is by Jerry Ordway, and it pretty much was the theme for all 4 volumes. The front cover by John Byrne, the back cover by Jerry Ordway. Obviously, the John Byrne was the lead creator in that series, on that run, but Jerry Ordway did an important part, so it's nice that at the very least they do feature his covers on the back cover. Although ironically enough, on previous trade paperbacks, Jerry Ordway actually did the cover of those trade paperbacks. You actually saw a couple of those covers in this very volume. So there we go. So we are halfway through. There's 4 volumes total, so we just covered 2 of them. So we have 2 volumes left to cover. We have a few nice treats coming up in the upcoming volumes. We have a story by with artwork by Art Adams. We have a few stories drawn by Ron Friends and inked by Brett Breeding, and more. We shall see.